Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city, and we start. Ashley woke up at 6 a.m. to the sharp ringing of her alarm clock, which insistently reminded her that today was a normal weekday, which meant it was time to get ready for school. She had been teaching in the elementary grades of a local public school for 5 years now, and she was used to this schedule, getting up early to prepare materials for lessons, drinking coffee, and checking if teaching materials were lost somewhere. Outside the window, the pre-dawn darkness still reigned, and the courtyard was enveloped in fresh coolness. Chris, her husband, continued to doze under the covers, snoring faintly into his pillow. Ashley thought it was his office day. He worked as a manager at a small marketing company and could afford to get up a little later. She sat on the edge of the bed, rubbed her tired eyes, trying to shake herself, and finally stood up. In the kitchen, she turned on the coffee maker. The steady sound of boiling water created an illusion of calm for a moment. As drops of freshly brewed coffee flowed into the flask, Ashley went over the schedule in her mind. First grade would start a new reading topic today, second grade would review math homework, and there would be a teacher meeting in the afternoon. The very thought of the meeting made her slightly tired. They would probably again discuss endless reports, academic performance, and plans for the next quarter. Soon Chris entered the kitchen, disheveled, wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. "Good morning," he greeted, glancing at the clock on the wall. "How did you sleep?" "Fine. Should I pour you some coffee?" "Yes, please." At that moment, their children appeared, two teenagers, 12-year-old Jenny and 13-year-old Tom. Both yawned sleepily and rubbed their eyes. "Mom," Jenny said, "can I buy myself lunch in the cafeteria today? I forgot to tell you yesterday that we ran out of my cereal at home." "Okay," Ashley smiled, trying not to betray her inner anxiety. Still, she felt responsible for ensuring that the children did not miss out on normal food. "But tomorrow I will definitely go to the store." Tom calmly took the sandwich and silently poured himself some juice. He's been talking a little lately, more on his phone or laptop. Typical teenage behavior, but it still bothered Ashley that they rarely discussed anything personal. There were also few conversations at the family table. "Is everything okay at school?" Chris asked, taking a sip of his coffee. "Yes," Tom said, without taking his eyes off the screen. "I have a history test today," Jenny added, chewing a sandwich. "I hope I write well." This was all the information they exchanged. No one talked about plans for the weekend, no one discussed interesting news. Silence became so habitual that Ashley sometimes didn't even notice how she herself lacked at least some emotional warmth. When the children finished breakfast, they grabbed their backpacks and ran to the bus. Chris, finishing his coffee, glanced briefly at his wife. "I have to go too. See you in the evening." "Yes, it's evening," smiles Ashley. Left alone, she wondered for a moment whether these years of marriage had flown by too quickly, when their conversations had turned from long night conversations about the future and dreams into monosyllabic, "How are you? Yes, okay." But the school bell, calling her to work, sounded louder in her mind than these thoughts. She had to run urgently, otherwise she would be late and let the class down. The school where Ashley taught was only 10 minutes away. Pulling into the parking lot, she sighed with some relief. By immersing herself in work, she could take her mind off the inner emptiness. Children's voices, the noise of corridors, greetings from colleagues, all this gave the illusion that life was filled with communication and meaning. However, the illusion was often dispelled when the routine began, preparing worksheets, checking notebooks, and managing to get to grips with the new school curriculum. Colleagues in the staff room also looked tired, discussing endless reports or plans for the end of the semester. "Hey, Ashley," Mrs. Haynes, the music teacher, turned to her. "We're going to hold a small concert for the younger grades next week. We should help with the decorations. You have a talent for drawing. Can you help?" "Of course," Ashley smiled. "When will we meet to discuss the details?" "We can do it today, after school. But we still have a teachers' meeting. Anyway, let's catch each other, okay?" Fine. As she spoke, Ashley felt the familiar burn of exhaustion. Again, a meeting, then another meeting. But at home, she has chores waiting for her. Children's homework, dinner, and everything goes in a loop, as if on repeat. The kids from the first grade rushed into Ashley's office noisy, with smiles, with their own tiny worries. Some had a fight during recess, some had lost a colored pencil, some had forgotten their physical education uniform. Sparks of life burned in their eyes, which had long ago faded in the eyes of Ashley herself. But she turned on the teacher's professional smile. "Good morning, everyone. Let's start our day." At these moments, she tried to give her students care and attention because they deserved to be treated sincerely. And if you think about it, she loved her job because she saw how children grow, how they learn to understand the world. But the love for the work did not save me from the feeling that everything in my personal life had somehow faded. The lessons flew by. A couple of times she remembered that Tom had a geography quiz today and Jenny had a history test, and she caught herself thinking that she hadn't really talked to them about preparation. And there was also resentment in her head. It would be great if Chris sometimes asked how she was doing at school, offered to prepare materials together, or at least listened to how her day went. But in the evenings, they usually immersed themselves in their own worries. He in work or rare outings with colleagues, she in checking notebooks and cooking. After classes, teachers gathered in one of the large auditoriums. There was a discussion about raising teaching standards, new standards, reports, and other paperwork. The director did most of the talking, vigorously waving his notepad. Ashley honestly tried to listen, but her thoughts were slipping away. They focused on how she herself felt in life, on whether there was a chance to find a common language with her husband again, on how not to lose touch with children growing up in the era of gadgets. She was distracted from these thoughts by the director's voice. "Mrs. Holmes," he suddenly turned to Ashley, "could you tell us about the progress in your class using the new reading method?" "Oh, yes, of course." Ashley was a little embarrassed, but quickly pulled herself together and briefly summed up the results of the test tasks. Colleagues made a few clarifications, nodded, and the conversation again moved on to the general course. But in her soul, she felt a slight trembling. Even at work, she was already acting almost automatically. When the meeting finally ended, the colleagues began to leave, and Mrs. Haynes stopped next to Ashley, reminding her of the scenery for the concert. Ashley looked at her watch. It was almost 4 in the evening. In order not to stay too long, they decided to walk down the corridor together and discuss what posters and decorations were needed. "I just want everything to look fun and bright," Mrs. Haynes said. "Children love holidays. You know how to come up with interesting ideas. Do you remember how we really liked your backgrounds for scenes last year?" "Yes, I remember." "Okay, let me get the sketches ready by Friday." "Thank you, Ashley. You are a real talent." It was already late afternoon when Ashley left school, holding a stack of papers in her hands. Another half hour in the car, and she's home. When she opened the door, the same picture reigned there. Children sitting in their rooms, some textbooks scattered about, a couple of dirty dishes in the sink. Chris, judging by the missing shoes in the corridor, has not arrived yet. "Mom," Jenny looked out of her room, "I'm hungry." "What do we have?" "I'll cook something now," Ashley sighed. She put the papers on the table, changed into more homely clothes, and headed to the stove. She started the oven to heat up semi-finished lasagna from the supermarket today. She had neither the strength nor the desire to cook something complicated. While the lasagna was in the oven, she called Tom to find out how he did on the quiz. "Fine," he shrugged. "I hope I got it to B. But, Mom, do you remember that tomorrow is our sports fair at school? Do we have to bring something to participate in the fundraiser?" "Oh, right," Ashley frowned. "It completely slipped my mind. I should have baked some cookies or a cupcake. Something. Maybe we can buy it at the store," Tom suggested. "I guess I'll have to," she sighed sadly. After all, at fairs something homemade is valued, but today she had neither the time nor the energy to conjure up baked goods. Chris returned a little later. Without any special greetings, he nodded to his wife, asked the children about their affairs, but immediately went to his office, citing urgent letters from his superiors. Ashley understood. It was hard for him too, his office routine, eternal reports. But they once had a completely different life. They could chat until late, discussing books or vacation plans, laughing at stupid jokes. Now there are dry formalities, as if everyone lives in a separate capsule. Dinner passed in silence. The kids devoured the lasagna in minutes before heading back to their devices. Chris didn't seem to have much of an appetite either. He just said that one of these days we should fix the faucet in the bathroom, and fell silent. Ashley nodded, straightened the napkins on the table, and felt the suffocating feeling of emptiness rise inside her again. By the time she finished washing the dishes, it was already dark. Ashley picked up her papers and tried to continue checking the tests, but the letters blurred together. I was pounding in my head. Why all this? Where is my life going? Is this how I imagined a happy marriage in which we talk less and less? She could ask herself endlessly, but the answer was more difficult. In the evening, he and Chris mechanically sat down in front of the TV. He switched channels, stopping at some TV series about cops. Ashley, for the sake of appearance, looked with him, but her thoughts were far away. She imagined how great it would be for everyone to go out into nature together, have a picnic, or at least try to remember what a real family conversation means. But these fantasies seemed to hit an invisible wall. The children had already gone to bed, and Chris, waiting for the end of the episode, said quietly, "I guess I'll go and rest too. Tired today." "Okay," Ashley smiled. She stayed on the couch for another minute, looking at the empty living room. Then she turned off the TV and went upstairs. A night light was burning in the bedroom, a soft, warm light that no longer brought comfort, but only reminded how their life worked and was frozen like an old photograph. Ashley changed her clothes and slid under the covers next to her already dozing husband. Trying not to make any noise, she lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. Everything inside was shrinking from acute melancholy. Again, she thought, when was the last time I felt joy? Maybe I need to cheer up, find a hobby, or try talking to Chris. But she was afraid to start this conversation. What if he decides that she is just being capricious, or decides that there is no problem? Trying to drown out her doubts, Ashley closed her eyes. Tomorrow will be another day with the same lessons, the same schedule, the same faces, and perhaps with the same unbearable emptiness in my chest. She did not know where their life was leading, and she felt that in this stable but wordless routine, the last drops of former intimacy were disappearing. And yet, as she fell asleep, Ashley cherished a tiny hope. Maybe she would find the strength to change something in order to return warmth and passion to this once beloved home. The next morning, Ashley woke up a little later than usual. She turned off the alarm, forgetting that she had moved it forward 10 minutes. Jumping out of bed, she hurriedly cleaned herself up, collected materials for lessons, and threw her laptop into her bag, because today she was going to check the students' work during the free window in the schedule. The weather was pleasant, sunny, and on the way to school, she momentarily felt a strange feeling of lightness, as if nature itself was supporting her, giving her the soft morning warmth. Her work remained to drown out the inner emptiness, but still some faint premonition of change trembled inside. Ashley herself could not explain where this hope came from. She, as usual, entered the school building through the main entrance. A narrow corridor with tiled floors, high windows, yellowed advertisements on stands, a place painfully familiar after 5 years. However, today there was some bustle in the staff room. "Have you heard the news yet?" Mrs. Haynes asked as soon as Ashley appeared on the threshold. "What other news?" Ashley was wary, thinking that we were talking again about some kind of inspection from the education department. "We have a new psychologist. He came from a neighboring county. He seems like a very nice young man." The colleague smiled slyly. "Our former specialist retired, so the director chose this one." "What's his name?" "I think it's Josh Rodriguez. Today is the first day." Ashley shrugged and answered calmly, "It's great that we found someone quickly. Lately, we have had many cases where children require the attention of a psychologist." She didn't attach much importance to these words, but she felt a slight curiosity. What kind of person is this new employee? However, there was no time to think about it. Classes started at 8 o'clock sharp, and the class was already waiting for her, full of little fidgets, ready to bombard her with questions about assignments and home projects. However, already at the big break, a senior administrator approached Ashley and said that the director was asking her to look into the psychologist's office along with several teachers. We need to discuss introducing a new emotional literacy program for elementary grades. Of course, I'll go, Ashley nodded, collecting her study plans. Great, the administrator answered. He's already there. The director's reception room was in another wing of the school, and Ashley hurried to look through the notes on the way. What exactly needed to be said? What problems usually arise in the classes? She entered a small office with a sign that read School Psychologist, and found 3 colleagues there standing by a shelf talking with a young man of about 30 or maybe a little younger. Vaguely catching fragments of phrases, Ashley quietly closed the door behind her. The new psychologist turned around, hearing the creaking of the hinges, and smiled welcomingly. Blonde hair, neatly styled, gray-blue eyes, she really found her face charming. He was not dressed in a standard gray suit, but in a slightly casual but stylish shirt and dress pants. There was a certain lightness about him clearly different from the more formal manner of the previous psychologist. "Hello," he said, approaching Ashley and extending his hand. "I'm Josh Rodriguez. I'm very glad to meet you." Ashley Holmes, primary school teacher. She returned the handshake. "Welcome to our school." He smiled even wider, looking straight into her eyes. And although it only lasted a moment, Ashley felt something jump inside her. She was unaccustomed to being looked at with such undisguised interest and was confused, trying to maintain a professional expression on her face. "I was told that your class has a very friendly atmosphere," Josh said, letting go of her hand. "I will be glad to cooperate, especially in terms of teaching children to interact with each other and develop emotional skills." "Yes, sure. I am always for the guys to feel safe and be able to express emotions correctly. If you need any help with materials, please contact me," she answered, trying not to show a slight tremor in her voice. The rest of his colleagues asked Josh what his plans were and how he intended to meet the children. He briefly talked about some of the programs he worked with at his previous school: group sessions, individual consultations, game training. His voice was calm and confident, and his speech was lively and accessible, not a trace of boringness or formal dryness. A few minutes later, the director joined them. While everyone was discussing the schedule and work plan, Ashley caught Josh's eye from time to time, and every time it seemed to her that he looked at her a little longer than at the others, as if he was particularly interested in something. A strange excitement rose within, making my heart beat faster. At the end of the conversation, the director suggested that everyone go to their classes, and Josh was given a tour of the school to get acquainted with the offices and corridors. As he dispersed, he looked at Ashley again, raising his eyebrows slightly and smiling at the corners of his lips. She quickly turned away, feeling the color rise to her cheeks. Ashley decided to go to the cafeteria for lunch. She usually took food with her, but today she didn't have time to pack a full lunch. Taking the salad in a plastic container, she noticed that Mrs. Haynes and several teachers had taken a table by the window and headed towards them. However, after taking only a couple of steps, I heard a familiar voice. "Ashley, will you join me? It seems that almost all the tables are occupied." Turning around, she saw Josh at a small 2-seater table. There was indeed one empty seat nearby. A slight uncertainty pricked her. Is it worth it? But what's the point of refusing if you still need to sit somewhere? It's normal to have lunch together, Ashley thought and nodded to him, sitting down opposite him. "How was your morning?" she asked, taking a sip of water. "Great. It's a little hectic. There's so much new stuff: offices, colleagues, office routine." He shrugged slightly. "But I'm glad everyone here is friendly. I think it will be interesting." Ashley smiled. "We have a good team, although sometimes we are overloaded with reports." "Well, where would education be without this?" She sighed, and suddenly it dawned on her that she sounded too mundane and dull. "But the children are wonderful." Surely you will quickly find a common language. Children are my main motivation. Seeing them grow emotionally and find ways to cope with their problems is inspiring. You know, I myself once, he paused, as if deciding whether to share, grew up in a dysfunctional family. If there had not been a good psychologist at my school, I don't know how life would have turned out. In general, I'm glad to be on this side of the barricades. I understand, Ashley nodded, involuntarily imbued with respect for his words. After all, many children are silent about what is happening at home, or they don't know how to explain that they are hurt or scared. It's nice to know that they can get support at school. Their conversation became more personal than the usual formal phrases of colleagues. Ashley felt that he was easy to communicate with. Every now and then he inserted little jokes, showing that he knew how to look at life with irony. He told how at his previous school children gave him homemade drawings and how once he almost drowned in paper airplanes during one of the training sessions. Ashley laughed as she imagined the scene. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had such an animated conversation with someone over lunch. Usually, it was limited to cursory questions like, "Did you manage to correct your tests?" or "How is your group today?" Noticing her smile, Josh said, "You know, it suits you very well when you laugh. It's as if sparkles appear in your eyes." Ashley was confused for a second. She had not received such direct praise for a long time. Feeling her heart beating faster, she looked down at the salad. "Thank you. I'm just probably a little exhausted lately. Work, family, everything is familiar, but sometimes you don't have enough strength. I hope you find time for yourself," he remarked in a soft tone. Teachers often forget that they themselves also need care and psychological relief. Ashley nodded, realizing how true his words were. She had truly forgotten that she could take care of herself without feeling guilty or embarrassed. In a short period of time, he, as if casually, touched her painful points and did not do it edifying. Rather, there was sincere concern in his voice. They talked all lunch from discussing school matters to their favorite books and films, and Ashley was surprised to discover that they liked the same music from the 80s and that they both once adored old thriller films. As the break was coming to an end, students who had returned from a walk began to enter the dining room, and the noise intensified. Ashley looked at her watch and hastily collected the container and threw away the drink wrapper. "I have to run. I have a lesson with the first class now. You need to repeat the alphabet and conduct a reading lesson." "Of course," Josh replied with a knowing smile, standing up. "If you have time and desire, stop by my office after school. Perhaps you can give me some ideas on how to better interact with juniors." Ashley caught an intonation that conveyed something more than just work-related interest. This thought sparked a warm feeling inside. "Okay, let's see how I manage. I have a couple more things to do today, but if I can, I'll definitely stop by." They walked out of the cafeteria together, and Ashley felt the glances of some of her colleagues and the curiosity in the eyes of the upperclassmen who were walking along the corridor. She felt a little awkward, like she was a teenager who had been caught on a date. But at the same time, in the depths of my soul, a long-forgotten feeling of my own attractiveness blossomed. How strange, she thought, returning to the class. She liked this slight dizziness, even if it was embarrassing. The rest of the school day passed on a high for her. She worked with the children, but periodically caught herself thinking that from time to time she remembered the conversation with Josh, his look, his funny remarks. It seemed to her that something had awakened in herself that she had long forgotten. It was both frightening and exciting because in all her married years with Chris, she had not experienced such light, tremulous flirting for a long time. When school ended, Ashley still had a pile of papers to sort through. She did not plan to stay for a long time after all. Children and routine matters awaited her at home. But curiosity prevailed. She wanted to visit Josh at least for a couple of minutes and share some of her experiences that could be useful in working with the younger ones. Moreover, he invited her himself. Children and other teachers gradually left the school building. At the psychologist's office, the door was slightly open, and she gently knocked with her knuckles. His voice was heard. "Yes, yes, come in." The chaos of the new place still reigned inside. Some boxes with folders had not been unpacked, and there were piles of booklets and methodological collections on the table. Josh, having taken off his jacket, was sitting at the computer, typing something and, noticing Ashley, leaned back in his chair, smiling. "Glad you stopped by. How was the rest of the day?" "Not bad. I came to share several teaching aids. I think they can help you when meeting first graders. And at the same time, see how you settled here." They discussed approaches for several minutes on how to teach children to express emotions and resolve conflicts in the classroom. Ashley talked about specific examples when quarrels arose out of nowhere due to misunderstanding, and Josh listened attentively, asked questions, and made notes in a notebook. And all this time, a subtle electricity seemed to hover between them, elusive, but very real. Finally finishing her small talk, Ashley realized she had stayed longer than she had planned. Glancing at the clock, she sighed. "It's time for me to run. There's still so much to do at home." "Of course, I don't dare detain you," Josh said softly and stood up, accompanying her to the door. "Ashley, thanks for your help today. This is really important to me. And—" he hesitated a little, as if choosing words. "I'm glad I was able to get to know you better. You are an amazing person." She again felt her heart skip a beat, and the color appeared on her face. Her throat was dry from such a direct compliment, and she just smiled in response, muttering, "Thank you. You also made an impression. Good night." Leaving the door behind her, Ashley felt herself walking down the corridor with some new sensation, as if the burden on my shoulders was no longer so heavy, as if the world had opened up a little to the light. Of course, she understood perfectly well that all this could be ordinary human charm, the friendliness of a new colleague who is trying to establish contact. And yet, she could not deny, she had not felt so pleased from someone's attention for a long time. On the way home, she barely noticed the honking of cars or the evening light flooding the streets. Thoughts revolved around the dinner conversation, light glances, hints, and although everything was mixed up in her soul, anxiety, guilt before herself, and timid joy, one thing was clear. She again felt interesting and desirable, and this opened a long closed door in her, behind which her lively, energetic, passionate nature once lived. She parked the car near the house and turned off the engine. She sat in silence for a few seconds, collecting her thoughts. Outside the window, the usual street lamp was burning, and in the house, most likely, the husband and children continued to go about their business. Usually at such moments, the return was accompanied by a heavy exhalation, back to routine. But now there remained a certain quiet echo of today inside her, and it awakened in her a desire for change. Ashley took her bag and got out of the car. Tomorrow there will be school again, the same children, colleagues, and Josh. And she didn't know what could come of this. But now, at least, she felt that she was not completely plunged into a colorless routine. For the first time in many years, she had a new reason to smile, even if it was just a slight, non-formally binding attention. Keeping this feeling, she turned the key in the lock and stepped into the house, where everyday worries and, alas, silence in her relationship with her husband awaited her. But now, deep down in my soul, there was a spark of hope that life can surprise and give pleasant surprises, even when you don't expect it at all. When Ashley returned home, it was already dusk outside the window. The house was dark, only the floor lamp was dimly lit in the living room, casting long shadows on the walls. The children had long since gone to bed, and the silence seemed especially deafening. Ashley walked into the kitchen and mechanically put on the kettle. Perhaps a mug of herbal tea would help calm her rambling thoughts. She suddenly felt fatigue rolling in like a heavy wave. Not the physical one, the body could still be stirred up, but the one that lies deep in the soul and comes out with a quiet but bitter feeling of emptiness. Half an hour had already passed and Chris still had not returned. Ashley sat at the kitchen table, listening to her thoughts. Sometimes it seemed to her that she was about to hear the door open, his steps rustle, and he would say the usual, "Hello, dear, how is it day?" But the clock moved inexorably towards midnight, and the house remained dead silent. She found herself remembering the events of the day at school and everything connected with Josh, the new psychologist. The warmth that flared from his attentive gaze, the slight flirtation, the admiration with which he looked at her during the conversation. I remembered how he said that a smile suits her very well. Ashley suddenly felt an attack of a slight but acute feeling of guilt because her husband was not nearby and she was sitting and thinking about another man. However, this feeling was immediately mixed with a quiet, addictive pleasure. For the first time in so many years, someone sees me, notices me, says compliments, wants to hear what's in my soul. How can I ignore this? When the faint rattle of keys was finally heard in the hallway, Ashley winced. Chris entered the door, slightly disheveled, wearing a wrinkled shirt, with a tired and slightly distant face. He put the briefcase on the floor and took off his shoes. Their eyes met for a moment, but there was no former warmth in this gaze. "Hello," he said quietly, walking into the kitchen. "Are you still awake?" "No." Ashley put aside the cold cup of tea. Something was delayed, problems. "Yes, work," Chris said shortly, rubbing his temple. "An urgent project. The boss decided to hold an unscheduled meeting. I had to redo everything." He looked truly exhausted, and Ashley felt a moment of compassion. Before, she always tried to support him, asking him what happened and how she could help. But now there were so many feelings mixed up in her, from disappointment to hidden irritation, that she only squeezed out. "Clear. Maybe you can have dinner. I can heat something up." "No, thanks. I had a snack on the way." There was a thick pause. Chris sat down at the table, sighed, and looked around the kitchen. An empty kettle, a couple of plates accidentally left on the countertop. Then he looked at his wife. "Ashley, are we okay?" he suddenly asked, and there was a strange note of uncertainty in his voice. She looked at him, trying to understand what exactly he meant. But to be honest, I could imagine that he felt a change. Her coldness, her reluctance to start conversations. In terms of, she clarified, trying not to betray her internal tension. "Don't know. We have hardly spoken for the last few days. I come, you are already sleeping or pretending to be asleep. In the morning, short phrases. I think you're tired of everything. Or of me." The words, "tired of me," struck a nerve in Ashley. He was partly right. She did feel that their relationship had become infinitely difficult. But she could not decide to have a frank conversation, fearing that it would result in conflict or mutual reproaches. "I'm really tired," she answered, trying to speak in an even tone. "At school, there is a routine. At home, there are endless things to do. Teenagers grow up, and it's not always easy with them either." Chris looked down and remained silent. His hands lay on the table, slightly clenched into fists. "Maybe we should somehow," he hesitated. "I don't know, arrange a vacation together, spend a weekend together." "We'll see," Ashley said evasively. "I need to find time. For everything." She herself felt how cool her answer was, because a year ago she would have seized on this idea, offered to go somewhere, leave the children with their grandmother. But now there was confusion inside her. Too much has happened in her soul, especially in the last few days, when she suddenly realized how easy it was for her to breathe next to Josh and how difficult it was in her own home. "Shall we go to bed?" Chris asked, slowly getting up from the table. "It's late, and tomorrow it's early to get up again." "Yes, go ahead," she agreed quietly. They went up to the second floor and went into the bedroom. Ashley was not eager for intimacy. She felt that after such a tense conversation, she even more wanted to just fall asleep, hide under the covers without exposing her soul and body. But Chris apparently decided otherwise. When she undressed to a t-shirt and shorts, he came up from behind, put his hands on her shoulders, and ran his lips along her neck. Once such movements made her melt and respond. Now, on the contrary, there was stiffness in the body, and the soul seemed to shrink from a feeling of inappropriateness. "Chris, I'm sorry," she said, turning around. "I'm tired. Really tired. Let's do it another time." He remained silent, but bitterness and disappointment were reflected in his eyes. He slowly removed his hands, stepped back, and sat down on the edge of the bed. A tense silence hung in the room. Ashley turned away, crawled under the blanket, and closed her eyes, feeling that a ball of contradictions was rolling inside her. She did not want to hurt him, but she could not deceive herself. Neither desire nor passion arose now. Next to Chris, she felt only guilt, fatigue, and dull heaviness, and thoughts of Josh's smile surfaced brighter than she would have liked. "I'm sorry," she repeated silently in her mind before falling into a restless sleep. The next day at school, she didn't see Josh in the morning. Having taken up her homework, Ashley tried to give herself completely to her work, checking notebooks, explaining a topic in second-grade mathematics, helping a couple of first graders who did not understand some letters. But when the big break came, she suddenly felt an inner worry. What if he appears? And how will she behave after yesterday's events at home? Trying not to show anything on her face, Ashley walked into the staff room to get coffee from the machine. Colleagues were animatedly discussing the upcoming autumn holiday, Harvest Day. The director planned to organize an exhibition of children's crafts and called the parents. Ashley usually loved these school events. They brought joy to the children. But now her thoughts kept returning to Josh. "Hey, Ashley," Mrs. Haynes called out to her. "Will you take part in the drawing master class? We are going to make a big autumn poster." "I think so," she nodded absently. "Tell me when to start, I'll come." Then a familiar soft voice was heard in the corridor. It was Josh talking to one of the older students. Ashley tensed automatically, but tried to remain calm. When he entered the teacher's room, something stirred inside her, as if from a sudden warm ray. He smiled at her in greeting and nodded to the others. "Josh, have you met all the teachers yet?" asked one of those present. "With most, but I think not with all," he answered friendly. "I take this as a challenge, by the end of the week, so that everyone knows who I am." Ashley caught him looking sideways at her. She responded with a short smile, while the tension within grew. Although she would not advertise it, she understood perfectly well that his attention was focused on her. And she felt that she had been thinking about him too much in the last 24 hours. On the same day, rehearsals were held at school for a small performance. Several classes were preparing a skit for the autumn holiday. Ashley was assigned as a set assistant, and she carried boxes of prop leaves, fall wreaths, and other props from the storage room. Behind the scenes of the assembly hall, traditional chaos reigned. Someone was looking for a part of the costume. Someone could not find glue to glue the parts to the backdrop of the stage. She was neatly arranging boxes near the backstage when she heard rustling behind her. I turned around and saw Josh. He was wearing the same shirt as in the morning, but he had rolled up his sleeves, exposing his forearms. Apparently, he was helping to move some furniture for a psychological exercise game in the assembly hall. "Oh, hi," he smiled, noticing Ashley. "Are you also involved in preparing the performance today?" "Yes, slightly," she shrugged. "I lay out the props so that the children don't lose them. It seems that there will still be a mess, but at least an attempt to restore order. I have already noticed," he looked at the scattered materials, "there is a kind of small kingdom of chaos here." They both smiled, simultaneously taking a step closer so as not to interfere with the passage of the guys scurrying past. It turned out that they stood almost closely in the partial shade between the curtains, hiding from the rest of the hall. Close by, Ashley felt his presence especially acutely, the emanating warmth, the slight smell of perfume. A wave of guilt rolled in again, and with it a wave of desire. "Ashley," Josh said quietly so as not to distract the kids. "How are you today? You look a little tired, to be honest." "Yes, probably," she admitted. "There are some difficulties at home. However, it doesn't matter." "Important," he countered gently, leaning a little closer. "What matters is how you feel." Her heart beat faster. She was looking for something to answer, but the words got stuck in her throat. Again, that moment arose when an invisible connection seemed to arise between them. And in this cramped backstage, his eyes looked at her with understanding and soft sympathy. "I know I shouldn't get into personal things," he added. "It's just, if you need a friend, someone who will listen, I'm here." He said this so sincerely that something broke inside Ashley. It had been so long since she had heard Chris or anyone else say this simply, "I'm here if you need to talk." She took a small step back, as if she wanted to move away, but the wooden scaffolding rested against her. Josh didn't move closer, but he didn't look away either. "Thank you," she whispered, lowering her eyes. At that same moment, she heard the music teacher on stage calling the children to sit down. The rehearsal was about to begin. Children's voices were heard. "Where is my suit? I lost the leaves. Hurry, now everything will begin." "Do you have a lesson now?" he asked almost in a whisper, trying not to disturb the rehearsal. "No, the window is in the schedule. But I have to help keep order," she smiled back, feeling the tension spark between them. And suddenly everything happened so quickly and unexpectedly that Ashley later could not even clearly remember who was the first to cross this invisible line. She felt Josh place his hand on her wrist, lightly, almost carefully. She looked up and their gazes met. There was excitement and desire in his eyes, and a flood of feelings flared up in her, overturning all the arguments of reason. "This is wrong. I am married. This should not happen." But the body and heart demanded something else: warmth, tenderness, the feeling of being alive. She didn't have time to think before she leaned towards him, or he towards her. Their lips connected in a short, almost weightless kiss, but the touch made her dizzy. Time seemed to stand still. All the sounds of the hall, rehearsals, and children's voices ceased to exist for a moment. There was only this flash of intimacy, which tore open her usual order of life. He pulled away first, breathing heavily. Surprise and a little guilt flashed in his gaze, as if he realized what he had done. Ashley felt her heart pounding as if it would jump out of her chest. Her cheeks burned, and she automatically pressed her palm to her lips. She wanted to say something that they shouldn't, that it was a sin, a mistake, but there were no words on her tongue, and there was a storm in her soul. "Sorry," Josh whispered, looking into her eyes. "I couldn't resist." "No, it's me," she answered, confused. Seconds seemed like an eternity. Fortunately for them, none of the children or colleagues were nearby backstage. Everyone was busy on stage or in the auditorium. Still, Ashley understood that they risked being noticed and was terribly afraid to imagine what rumors would then spread around the school. The thought that Chris might find out about this was especially frightening. "We should probably go back," she breathed, finding the strength to look away. "The children will now start looking for me and you." "I understand," he nodded with difficulty, stepping back and lowering his hands. "Sorry, I just didn't want to hurt you." "No need to apologize," she replied, finally finding his gaze. "Not here, not now." They stood there for a few more seconds, as if trying to understand what was between them now. Everything was too fast, too unexpected. Ashley felt fear, attraction, and a whole bunch of remorse, and at the same time, a feeling of delight that had not been experienced for a long time. Having collected herself, she straightened her blouse, trying to regain the appearance of calm, and walked out from behind the scenes. Josh followed after a few moments so it wouldn't look suspicious. The voices of teachers were heard in the hall. "Quiet, guys. Let's start the run-through." No one noticed the worried look they exchanged before Ashley headed towards the exit, and he headed in the opposite direction, so as not to attract too much attention. The rest of the day passed for Ashley in a blur. The scene of their kiss flashed before my eyes again and again. She carried out her lessons mechanically, but everything was seething in her soul. Perhaps it was just a moment, a short touch of lips, but it became for her that first step over the edge. She felt that now it was difficult to simply pretend that there was nothing between them. Returning home, she felt a heavy lump inside. The betrayal, even the smallest, but no less real, had already happened. At least one part of her wanted to stop, put a hard line and say, "No, I can't do this." But another, stronger one, was drawn to Josh, to his warmth and understanding. "What am I doing?" she asked herself, sitting behind the wheel. But there was no answer. At home, I was greeted by a familiar environment. The children were at home. Chris was still at work. Having prepared a quick dinner, she called her daughter and son to the table. They came down, talking among themselves about some videos they had watched. Not a single question about how her day was. Not a single curious glance were used to the fact that Mom just works at school. Previously, when the children were younger, they asked about everything in the world and shared their worries. Now they were growing up and retreating more and more into their own world. "Mom, will you buy us a movie ticket tomorrow?" "Tom and I want to go to the premiere," Jenny said in a low voice when they were already putting away the dishes. "Yes, of course, I'll buy it. Do you want to go alone or with friends?" "There will be friends too," Tom put in, shrugging. "All parents have their hands full, so we are on our own. Nothing." "You can handle it, I think," Ashley nodded. The children nodded, thanked her, and after a couple of minutes, she was alone again. The silence of the house crushed her, and she could not get rid of the emerging image, that narrow space behind the scenes, the dim half-light and Josh's lips almost pressing against hers. Her mind demanded to get it out of her head, but her heart seemed to be fueled by a memory that warmed her deeper than any tea or conversation with her husband in recent years. Chris returned late again, an hour earlier than yesterday, but still, when it was long ago dark outside. Noticing his wife in the living room, he approached and touched her shoulder. "How is the day?" "Everything is fine." "It's normal," she answered restrainedly, trying not to show confusion. He suggested drinking tea together, and they went into the kitchen. Chris felt that Ashley was still tense and clearly not eager to talk. They drank tea almost silently, and each was lost in his own thoughts. Ashley was increasingly drawn outside from this house, from this silence, but outwardly she remained calm, indifferent. Chris, apparently, did not dare to question him, and so they ended their day in the usual getting nowhere communication. Going to bed, Ashley no longer felt sorry for herself, only a keen understanding. "There is a crack in my life, and I am standing on the edge, not knowing what will happen next." The school was in turmoil that evening, with parent-teacher conferences in several elementary and middle school classrooms lasting longer than usual. The autumn season was always busy tests, preparation for the Harvest Festival, planning additional activities. Parents walked back and forth along the corridors, discussing their children's progress in whispers and looking closely at the announcements posted on the stands. Ashley held her first grade meeting. At some point, she noticed that she had no strength and enthusiasm left, at all too many problems had accumulated both at school and at home. While telling her parents the same phrases about the need to help children with reading, about the importance of homework, she caught herself thinking about completely different things. Somewhere in the back of her mind, it was ringing that she could stay today to help with the papers of the new school psychologist, Josh. Formally, she had already agreed to help him put things in order in the documents on the emotional development of younger schoolchildren, the very teaching materials that needed to be put aside for inspection. But she felt that the papers were just a convenient excuse. When the official part was over, parents and teachers began to disperse. The corridors gradually became empty. Only rare late, delayed mothers and fathers still spoke with the class teachers, discussing individual issues. Ashley nodded goodbye to the last parents, thanked them for coming, and walked them to the door. Her soul was pulsating with an alarming rhythm. She understood that she was taking a risk, sensing that everything could go too far. She looked into the staff room, exchanged a few words with the administrator on duty, pretending to finish the minutes of the meeting, and only then headed to the school psychologist's office. The door was ajar, the light was on. She paused on the threshold for a second, straightened her hair, took a deep breath. "It's not too late to change your mind," she thought, but her heart was already beating in her throat. "Can?" she asked quietly, timidly rapping her knuckles on the open door. "Come in," a familiar voice was heard. She entered. Josh was sitting at the table, in the light of the desk lamp, looking through papers from some form. Hearing footsteps, he looked up and smiled. The smile was quiet, understanding, almost affectionate. "Glad you came," he said, putting the papers aside. "I've already started to sort it out, but there are so many manuals here that I can't do it without you." He pointed to 3 large stacks of folders, half sorted. Ashley nodded, silently sitting down on a chair nearby. Everything inside her was shrinking. The realization that the two of them were in an empty school, essentially after an official working day, made her heart pound. She unbuttoned her jacket so she could breathe a little easier and took a book of psychological tests from the top pile. For a minute, they really got down to business. Ashley flipped through the instructions for the activities, separated the necessary sheets, and Josh made notes. There was a tense silence between them in which their feelings pulsated, and when their hands accidentally touched, passing each other another folder, Ashley remembered that short kiss backstage, after which her life began to fall apart. "How was the meeting?" he asked to clear the air. "I managed," she answered, trying to speak evenly. "As usual, parents worry and ask questions, but everything is standard. How's your day?" Conducted individual conversations with several teenagers from high school. One boy is experiencing severe anxiety. He sighed and did not finish because something else suddenly flashed in his gaze. They made eye contact. The seconds lasted agonizingly long, and Ashley felt a hot wave of desire rapidly rising within. In recent days and even weeks, all they did was elude each other or limit themselves to short glances and hints. But this evening seemed to be pushing them to a new point. "Ashley," Josh said quietly, pushing the papers aside, "I don't want to pretend that we're just here because of the reports." She stood up impulsively, as if she wanted to say, "We can't." But the words got stuck in my throat. The very thought of what would happen if someone caught them together was terrifying. But she was attracted even more strongly by this mystery, by that loving feeling that she had not experienced for many years. "Me, too," she admitted, lowering her head. He came closer, touched her shoulder, ran his hand through her hair. Her head began to spin. Ashley felt that she could no longer resist yes. She realized how much of a betrayal this was towards her husband and family. But all day, and even all last night, she was thinking about one thing that she wanted to finally feel not driven and empty, but alive and desired. "Let's go," Josh said barely audibly, taking her hand. He led her down the hallway, through the quiet corners of the school, until they reached the utility room where the gym mats and equipment for gym class were usually kept. The door is ajar, the light is on somewhere at the end of the hall. It smelled of rubber and slightly dusty mats. They walked inside, and Ashley immediately felt some kind of unreality of what was happening. All these years she had been an exemplary wife, a primary school teacher, and now she was standing in the middle of an empty school gym, holding the hand of another man. "Are you sure?" Josh asked, looking into her eyes. Ashley couldn't answer in words. She was simply drawn to him like a magnet, and the next moment their lips met in a long, passionate kiss. Her whole body was burning, and she, forgetting fear, gave herself over to the wave of passion that engulfed her. It's hard to say at what moment the mobile phone rang. Lost in the depths of the bag, maybe it was Chris, maybe the children. But Ashley didn't pay attention to him. I couldn't. All feelings are intertwined. Acute desire, liberation from many years of boredom and pain, and next to it is the caustic shadow of guilt, teasing and prohibiting. As if trying to hide from the world, they sank onto these makeshift mattresses intended for children's gymnastics. All reality outside the gym ceased to exist. Ashley couldn't remember the last time she felt such a jolt in her mind and body. No words were needed. They loved, hugged, pressed against each other as if at any moment they could lose everything. Clothes slipped off with hasty, awkward movements, and in the dim space only intermittent sighs and the knocking of their intertwined bodies were heard. It was no longer flirting or a casual kiss. They clearly understood what they were doing. We crossed that forbidden line after which there is no way back. And in this short moment, desire turned out to be stronger than morality. Long conversations about family, long-term obligations. For a while, there was only an exciting whirlwind. When it was all over, Ashley felt her heart pounding painfully. They lay there for a few seconds, trying to calm their breathing, and then stood up, trying to find clothes and get themselves in order. The beating of the heart seemed to reverberate in my temples. Tears flowed down Ashley's face, mixed from feelings of delight and despair. "I'm sorry," she whispered, although she didn't understand who these words were referring to, Josh or herself. He helped her button up her shirt and ran his hand over her cheek. "Don't apologize." He tried to say something encouraging, but the phrases were stuck. "I didn't mean to hurt you." They understood that time was passing, and someone might come into the gym, deciding to check if everything was in order after the meeting. Or a cleaning lady, or a security guard on duty. We had to hurry. Hastily gathering their things, they went out into the corridor, trying to walk so as not to attract attention. There really was almost no one left in the school. The administrator was already turning off the lights in the offices, preparing to close the building. At the very front door, they parted quickly, under the gaze of the attendant passing by. Ashley nodded, as if saying goodbye like a normal colleague. Josh responded with only a slight movement of his head and disappeared into the dimness of the corridor, heading to his office or to another exit. Once upon a time, this would have seemed terribly romantic to her, a secret meeting, parting under the gaze of others. Now she felt an icy lump inside. It was damp and cool outside. Ashley ran to the car, barely feeling her legs. Sitting behind the wheel, she closed the door and froze, clutching the steering wheel with her fingers. In the rearview mirror, she saw her reflection, disheveled hair, reddened eyes, and tears rolled down her cheeks, and she didn't know whether to rejoice or curse herself. "What have I done?" she thought once again before giving vent to desperate sobs. The line she had hesitated to cross was now left behind. She committed treason, completely real, not theoretical. And at that same moment, another feeling pierced her. Despite the guilt, she experienced something amazingly liberating. It was as if she had been living in a stuffy, confined space for many years, and now she had burst out, taking a deep breath. The tears did not subside. She couldn't understand whether she was crying because she had betrayed her husband, children, her previous way of life, or because she had finally moved on from the relationship that had been suffocating her for a long time. Maybe all at once. Several minutes passed before she stopped sobbing. I checked my phone indeed. There were missed calls from Chris. "Damn," she whispered, still not knowing what she would say to her husband. Taking a deep breath, she started the car and pulled out of the school parking lot. The rain began to drizzle, and the windshield wipers slid across the glass, blurring the lights of the streetlights into stripes of color. She had no idea what would happen when she returned home and saw Chris. "I couldn't imagine how I would be able to look children in the eyes." But she knew one thing for sure. Tonight something finally broke in her former life, and at the same time something awakened in her. And now this whirlpool of emotions cannot be stopped. She faced long hours of internal struggle and perhaps difficult decisions about the future. But for now, through her tears, she felt a strange relief. Even though everything was falling apart, she was finally not hiding behind the wall of monotonous everyday life. She is alive, her heart is beating, and since the line has been crossed, she will have to learn to live in a new reality, scary, but it seems more real than ever before. The next day, after returning late from school, Ashley woke up early again. Sitting on the edge of her bed in the semi-darkness, she found herself thinking about completely different thoughts than usual. Not assignment lists for students, not problems with high school, not plans for lunch. Her mind persistently returned to the memories of last night about the swearing in the back room, about the dim light, about Josh's hot touches. And this caused her such an explosion of feelings that she could hardly keep them under control. On the one hand, somewhere deep down, she felt heavy guilt and understood. What she did was unacceptable in relation to her husband. On the other hand, she remembered how much she missed something real, living, and how intoxicating this forbidden fruit had an effect on her. Ashley realized with bitterness that she was now leading a double life and could no longer pretend that everything was the same. She walked into the kitchen to put on the coffee. The children were still sleeping, and Chris was in no hurry to go down. Apparently, he stayed late at work again. There were some papers lying on the table, and Ashley remembered that her son, Tom, was studying for a math test. She frowned. She couldn't remember the last time she sat down with him to check his homework or help with assignments. Daughter, Jenny, also increasingly remained on her own, and Ashley missed out on general conversations at family dinners. When footsteps rustled down the stairs, she automatically looked away from the window and tried to make her face fresher. It was Chris. He looked tired, but this time as if with hidden wariness. He walked past, nodding to her in greeting. Usually, he took a cup of coffee and asked some routine questions. Today, he stood nearby, as if he wanted to say something important, but did not dare. "Good morning," Chris greeted quietly. "Hi," Ashley replied, looking down at her mug. "How did you sleep?" "Fine. Listen, I called you a couple of times last night. I wanted to know when you would be back," he began carefully. "You didn't answer the phone. Everything is fine." Ashley felt an unpleasant chill tighten in her stomach. Yesterday, she saw missed calls on her phone, but then she was too absorbed in her own storm of feelings and did not call back. "Sorry, I was already leaving, apparently. The phone was in the bag without sound," she lied, trying to keep her voice even. "There were conversations with the students' parents. Then we had to help a colleague sort out the documents for the new program." She learned these excuses almost by heart. Chris looked at her carefully, slightly pursing his lips. "I understand." "Well, okay," he said, although there was a strange understatement in his voice. "Let's have breakfast." "I'm not particularly hungry," Ashley quickly countered. "I'll drink coffee and go to school. I have a working day this morning." Chris remained silent, but judging by his look, he was puzzled by such coldness on her part. Literally a year ago, she would have helped him set the table and asked him what was new, and now she was increasingly limited to short phrases. It cut her soul, but she did not know how to bridge the gap that had arisen between them. School corridors, usually filled with children's hubbub, brought her ambivalent relief. Here, among children's questions and teaching manuals, she could escape from thoughts about her family and her new lover. However, at the same time, this place became a dangerous zone, because every moment was a reminder of what happened in the utility room the day before. And as soon as she saw Josh's figure in the corridor, desire flared up inside again. At first, she tried to avoid him. She did not go into the teacher's room, where he might appear, and did not look up when they found themselves in the same room. But Josh, as if sensing her confusion, found the moment to intercept her. "Ashley," he called quietly as she left the director's office with an armful of papers. "Do you have a couple of minutes? There's something we need to discuss." She looked wary and looked around to make sure no one was seeing them, and only then she nodded. "Yes, but not for long. I need to get ready for lessons." They turned into a small, empty classroom on the ground floor, usually used for clubs. They closed the door behind them. Ashley's heart was pounding as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. Although, in essence, this was the case, their connection became a secret that had to be protected in every possible way. "I don't know what to do," she admitted quietly, without waiting for him to speak. "Yesterday was too strong. I still can't get over it. And it's hard for me at home." "I understand," Josh replied, gently touching her hand. "You're hurt, and I don't want to make it worse. If you want, we can keep our distance." She felt a sharp surge of panic at just these words, "keep your distance." Part of her was truly horrified at how far they had gone, but the other one only wanted greater rapprochement. "I don't know what I want," she whispered, lowering her eyes. "Every time I see you, everything inside turns upside down." She said this with desperation in her voice. Josh moved a little closer, putting his arm around her shoulders. "We can find a way to see each other less often if that helps. But I myself don't want to lose you." Their breathing mingled, and it seemed that in another moment they would not be able to hold back again. But the bell rang in the corridor, and Ashley woke up. "I have to go. I have a class." He nodded, trying not to detain her. Before leaving, she only cast a quick glance. His eyes reflected a mixture of passion and anxiety, and although she understood that she needed to stop, her heart no longer obeyed orders. The days dragged on one after another in a strange whirlpool. In the morning, she woke up in one reality with her husband, who was increasingly wary, but still did not understand what was going on. She tried to be collected with the children, but the children sensed changes in her mood. She was often thoughtful and reacted irritably to little things. At school, at every opportunity, she looked for Josh. They secretly crossed paths in the corridors, hugged each other in an empty classroom, and sometimes found moments to exchange a few phrases in quiet corners. One afternoon, they again stayed after school, supposedly to sort out papers. However, this time nothing was planned, and they deliberately set up the situation in order to meet. Within a quarter of an hour, having locked themselves in a tiny book storage room, they were tearing off each other's clothes, in a hurry, in feverish thirst. Each of their secret intimacy was like a drug. It brought Ashley bright moments of euphoria, made her forget about the gray routine and feel alive. But after that came waves of guilt and fear of being exposed. She could no longer deny that she was addicted to these meetings. From Josh. Sometimes in the evening, lying in bed next to Chris, she would close her eyes and imagine what they did during the day. The body responded to these memories. When Chris tried to touch her, she pulled away under the pretext of fatigue. She understood that this was noticeable. His hands fell silent, and he turned to the wall, and an oppressive silence covered the bedroom. Several weeks of this double life passed, and the tension in the house reached its limit. Chris began to indirectly show distrust. He either asked questions about school events or asked why she was often late. Sometimes in the evening, he would pretend to be engrossed in his phone, but Ashley would catch him watching her on the sly, checking to see if she was smiling under her breath, if she was texting someone. One morning, after the kids had already left for school, Chris, coming out of the shower, asked directly, "Tell me honestly, Ashley, are you okay? I don't understand why you're so busy after school. If you need help, I can somehow adjust the schedule." She froze, carefully pouring coffee into her mug to hide the trembling in her hands. "Everything is under control, Chris. It's just that the workload is heavy now, semester reports and preparation for the autumn holiday, and some students are having problems. I'm a teacher. This is not a 9 to 5 office. You know." He sighed and put his hand on her shoulder. Previously, this gesture had been familiar and warm to them, but now she felt that she was tense and could not respond with affection. "I know that your job is not easy, but damn, I think we're growing apart. Children see this too. I—" He paused for a moment, then added, "I'm just afraid that you feel really bad with me." This confession came unexpectedly. Ashley looked at him and saw the pain in his eyes. She had once loved this man with all her heart. She understood that with her lies, she was causing him suffering, and this made her double life even more painful. "Don't say that," she breathed. I'm just tired. We must somehow survive this period." And he didn't bother her. He just nodded, lowering his eyes, as if not knowing whether to believe her words. She saw that anxiety was brewing inside him, but so far he had not asked direct questions like, "Are you cheating on me?" Apparently, he himself did not dare to admit the possibility of such an option. The more Chris tried to establish contact, the more Ashley moved away from him and fell into her new world where there is Josh, his hot touches, and intoxicating kisses. Each time she told herself, "I need to stop," or figure it out and make a decision, either save the marriage or leave. But in fact, she avoided this choice, continuing to feed on those short bursts of passion, like a person who is unable to refuse a dose. Sometimes at night, she would get out of bed when Chris was already asleep, go to the bathroom and cry quietly, biting her lips so as not to wake anyone. She hated herself for deceiving her, but just remembering Josh's touch made her heart skip a beat. "Mom, are you okay?" Jenny once asked when she saw that Ashley's eyes were red from crying. "Everything is fine, I just didn't get enough sleep," she lied, hastily turning away and pretending to be busy cleaning. Tom also looked at his mother with a question in his eyes, but his teenage isolation did not allow him to openly show concern. He only once said to his sister, loudly so that his mother could hear, "Mom is kind of depressed now, or what?" And it seemed to hit Ashley in the very heart, because she understood. Children are not stupid, they see tension. One evening, when Ashley had a meeting with Josh after school, she sat in her car in the school parking lot and couldn't bring herself to go inside. She understood. One more meeting, and she would finally plunge into this abyss. But body and mind argued with each other. "Maybe that's enough," she said to herself. "We must stop before it's too late." But the memories of his smile, of how her soul came to life next to him, became stronger than any arguments of reason. Finally, she took her bag and got out of the car. It was already getting dark. The school building was lit only by emergency lamps. She walked in, her heart pounding in her ears. Halfway to the psychologist's office, I heard footsteps. It turned out to be one of the technical staff. Ashley was afraid that she would be noticed, but the man walked past without asking questions. School support staff are used to teachers being late often. In the empty corridor near the room for psychological consultations, she saw Josh. He was standing leaning against the wall, with papers in his hands, and when he saw her, he smiled with that special look that made everything inside her shrink and melt at the same time. "Hello," he said quietly. "I was already starting to think that you wouldn't come." "I thought I wouldn't come," Ashley admitted, barely holding back her tears. "I'm scared." "Scary of what? What will they find out, or that you and I have reached this point?" She remained silent, only nodding. Josh put the papers down and hugged her. The warm smell of his body overshadowed everything around, and as always happened at such moments, the thought, "stop lying," was drowned in a wave of passion. They entered the office, locked the door, and didn't even start any conversations about work. They immediately clung to each other, unable to resist. Sometimes Ashley thought, "This is not love. This is attraction. This is a search for salvation from routine emptiness." But then, looking into Josh's eyes, feeling his sincere participation, she became confused. Perhaps this was not just a physical connection, but something more. However, she couldn't say for sure. A few days later, at dinner, the kids were sitting in the living room with pizza and some TV series on, and Chris walked up to Ashley while she was doing the dishes. He carefully turned off the tap and said quietly, "We need to talk." His tone was serious and a little tense. Ashley felt her insides tighten. Does he really know everything? A panicked thought flashed, but outwardly she tried to remain calm. "I'm listening." She took off her rubber gloves, turning to her husband. "When do you have free time?" Chris clarified, trying not to raise his voice so that the children would not hear. "I would like you and I to go somewhere together. Maybe to a restaurant or to the park for a walk. Just talk, sit." Ashley was confused. On the one hand, it was almost a noble gesture. Chris is trying to revive the relationship, to become closer. On the other hand, she was afraid in advance what exactly he would have to tell him about. "I'm in trouble at school right now," she muttered. "Yes, and at your work too." "I can find time," he said firmly. "Let's at least next week." There was determination in his eyes. Ashley nodded, not daring to openly object. Somewhere inside, she had a feeling. What if this is our last opportunity to bring everything back? But she wasn't sure if she wanted to go back to that life. When he left the kitchen, she froze, leaning on the countertop, and closed her eyes. The double life was growing every day. The coolness at home was growing, from which Chris was desperately trying to get her out. And at school, the intensity of passion with Josh was growing. It seemed to her that these two worlds could not exist at the same time for too long. Sooner or later, they would collide, and the consequences would be devastating. She didn't know where to run. Reason prompted. It was time to make a choice. But my heart was pulled in different directions. And while it did not find an answer, she literally lived in deception. She tried to maintain the appearance of the ordinary life of a mother and wife, and secretly hurried to underground dates with her lover, which became more and more frequent and more desperate. That evening, standing in the dark of the living room and listening to the laughter of the children from the next room, Ashley looked through the curtains at the moonless sky. There was the same emptiness in her soul that once led her to her first kiss with Josh. But now fear has been added to it. She realized that the state she was in could not last forever. And when everything collapses, the consequences will be worse than she could have imagined. However, despite these disturbing thoughts, she did not stop herself on the way to Josh. Their meetings have really become like an addiction, where the mind repeats, "no need," but the body and soul scream, "more." And at the same time, deep down, she saw that Chris was beginning to understand. It was no longer just fatigue or stress between them, something much more serious was slipping away from their life together. Thus began a new page of her existence in two worlds, and Ashley felt with horror how these worlds were rapidly drawing closer together, ready to collide head-on, leaving behind fragments of what was dear to her. Chris didn't notice the changes right away. At first, he was only surprised why Ashley began to look at her phone so much, stopped freezing in search of words, if suddenly he was nearby. She seemed to live somewhere in another space, her gaze constantly flying to the screen. She often stayed late at work and returned home with a pale, but somehow excited face. She seemed to be filled with conflicting emotions, anxiety, and at the same time subtle joy. Chris at first tried to convince himself that this was an ordinary school failure, that she might be communicating in parent chats or texting a lot with colleagues about upcoming events. But inside, where unconscious pain was brewing, a premonition was already stirring alarmingly. He felt that his wife seemed to be slipping away. One evening, Ashley forgot her phone on the kitchen table. It was a small thing. She went to the bathroom. The water in the shower began to rustle. Chris automatically glanced at her smartphone, noticed the flickering screen. A notification had arrived from an unfamiliar contact. My heart trembled. He didn't want to look paranoid, didn't want to reach for someone else's phone. But his hand, as if living its own life, still reached out to this device. He saw an unfamiliar avatar, a short text, "I miss it when I don't see your smile." And below is a name that meant nothing to him. "I miss." Chris reread the message several times, trying to find an excuse. Maybe it's a parent from school or a friend, but why such intimacy? He felt a lump tighten in his chest and a chill run down his spine. My heart was pounding, either from fear or from almost tangible pain. He took the phone and unlocked it. First of all, I opened the messenger. From surprise, his eyes stung. A long tape of correspondence, hundreds of messages, photographs, voicemails, and all of them were imbued with warmth and tenderness, which Ashley had not given to him for a long time. He read, barely breathing. Gradually, I came to the lines where that man admitted how he looked forward to every moment spent with her. Ashley answered, "And I can't live without you," and asked when they would be able to be alone again. The date of last night, the evening before yesterday. Everything matched when she said that she was delayed at school. Chris sat motionless for a moment, staring at the screen. Then he forced himself to scroll further through the correspondence, deeper, further than he should have. Everything was very clear there. Open declarations of love, conversations about secret meetings in empty rooms of the school, their intimate moments. Chris's fingers clenched so hard that his knuckles turned white, and there was a buzzing sound in his head. He didn't want to believe it. I didn't want all this to turn out to be true about the woman with whom I lived for so many years, shared everyday life, and raised children. But every word in the correspondence hit his soul, shattering hopes and illusions. His legs stopped obeying him. He carefully put the phone back in place, as if he was afraid of getting burned. And a moment later, I heard the water in the shower stop behind the wall. I had to get up, take a deep breath, and leave the kitchen so that she wouldn't catch him with her smartphone in his hands. Chris walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa, slouching and looking at one point. When Ashley returned, the house was silent. She probably noticed that he was acting strange, but did not dare ask. And Chris didn't know what words to choose. Part of his mind screamed, "You must express everything in person, demand an explanation." But he felt so deceived, so devastated and humiliated that he simply could not squeeze out a sound. He looked at his wife, realizing she was now a stranger. She already had a different world, a different person, different feelings, and he is not in them. At dinner, he remained silent, mechanically moving food from one side of the plate to the other. The children talked about their affairs, and Ashley nodded sluggishly and sometimes answered. Chris, out of the corner of his eye, saw her picking up her phone, scrolling through it, maybe checking messages from him. Now Chris knew from whom she was waiting for new words, who brought a smile to her face. But he didn't make a scene or make loud accusations. Too sharp a pain froze inside, like frozen ice. He just watched. Looking at her profile, at the slightly detached expression on her face, he understood. Much had already been lost. And she apparently had no idea that the secret hidden in her smartphone had become known to him. Of course, she could notice the change in his gaze and the cold emptiness with which he looks at her, but how to explain this to the eyes of children? Anyway, in public, they need to continue to play the role of an ordinary family. While the kids moved their plates, excitedly talking about their plans for the weekend, Chris barely heard them. He felt like his entire familiar world was falling apart inside. This pain was too great to be expressed in a loud quarrel. He sat as if stunned, only one thought holding himself back from rushing to the door or screaming, "Why are you doing this to me?" But he remained silent. When dinner was over, Chris helped put away the dishes, even automatically washed the plates, secretly wondering, how much longer can I do this? But I saw no other way out, and when Ashley passed by, a strange smile flashed across her face again, the same one that used to belong to him. Now it is addressed to someone else. Chris could only continue to silently watch when she reached for the phone or said, "I'll be late after work," and think, does he still have a chance to win her back? Or has their marriage finally become a thing of the past, along with trust and love? That night he lay in bed longer than usual, unable to close his eyes. It seemed to him that the whole house had become alien to him. Even the children behind the wall were now in the dark, and he was at the center of a crushing truth. The world in which Ashley was his wife and friend was truly crumbling, and with every new breath Chris took, the fragments of this world fell to the floor in the silence of the night and hopelessness. Chris sat on the edge of the living room couch, slouched, his smartphone clutched in his hand until his fingers turned slightly white. There was a dull, heavy look in the eyes, as if unbearable pain had been raging inside for a long time. Ashley stood opposite him, wrapping her arms around herself, as if trying to protect herself from his words or from the very reality in which they now found themselves. "Tell the truth," he finally said, quietly but clearly. "Do you have another one?" She raised her eyes and fear flashed into them. But the next second, a shadow of determination seemed to run across his face to deny. It was as if she knew what to say in advance. "Chris, this is absurd." "There's nothing like that," she answered, trying to sound indignant, although her voice was trembling. "Why do you think so? Where do these questions come from?" Chris sighed heavily. He paused, once again checking in his mind whether he was sure of what he was about to do. Still, the chest pain left no options. "I saw your correspondence, Ashley," he said evenly. "No need to pretend. I have proof." For a moment, the air seemed to thicken, becoming sticky and dense. Ashley tried to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat. Deny further, making up excuses. But she didn't have time to say anything, because Chris had already started dialing the number on his phone, the same one that he found in her messages. "Chris, what are you doing?" She exhaled, fearfully watching his movements. "No need." "We'll see," he answered in a colorless voice, putting his smartphone to his ear. Ashley stood frozen in horror. She couldn't imagine how Josh would behave if Chris called. But everything happened too quickly, and there was neither the strength nor the words to stop the husband. Chris's ear was touched by the rustle of the connection, then short beeps. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, at the other end of the line they answered, judging by the barely audible hello. Chris remained silent, letting his interlocutor understand that he did not know who he was talking to. Then he said quietly, "Hello, this is Chris, Ashley's husband. I want to talk." He didn't shout or threaten, but there was such suppressed determination in the voice that Ashley's heart sank. She watched as an icy mask froze on her husband's face and a bitter reproach to the whole world in his eyes. There was a pause on the other end. Apparently, the interlocutor was in shock. When Josh spoke, his voice was quiet and halting. I'm sorry I don't understand." Chris listened, and his face became more and more frozen. He seemed to absorb every word, expecting that he was about to hear a confession. But Josh couldn't seem to pull himself together. "Listen, I probably made a mistake." Yes, probably someone got into the wrong place. Not a mistake, Chris cut him off. I know who you are, and I understand perfectly well what is happening between you and my wife. These words echoed in the room. Ashley sobbed, racked with shame and guilt. A heavy silence hung in the receiver, and a second later muffled sounds were heard, as if Josh wanted to say something, but could not find the words. Then a short beep was heard. He simply hung up the call. Chris lowered the phone, not taking his eyes off Ashley. It was clear from the expression on his face that he had had enough, even if the conversation was short and incoherent. Well, he finally said in a lifeless tone, are you still going to deny it? Ashley didn't know what to answer. There was a lump in my throat, and tears filled my eyes, covering everything around me. She took a step forward, as if she wanted to come closer, but Chris remained sitting without even raising his head. I'm sorry, she whispered, having difficulty pronouncing the words. I don't know how it happened. It was a mistake. Huge mistake. I'm confused. Tears flowed down her cheeks. She pressed her palms to her mouth, as if she wanted to hold back a scream. However, Chris did not rush to her, did not yell, did not say, how could you? He was simply silent, staring at one point in front of him. And this silence frightened Ashley much more than any harsh words or curses. I love only you, she said through ragged breaths. It was all stupid. I don't know what came over me. Chris, please say something. She took another step, intending to touch his shoulder. But he stood up, not allowing her to get closer, raised his eyes, and an abyss of pain mixed with disappointment froze in them. You have nothing to ask me for, he finally responded. You've already told everything to the one who misses you without your smile, hasn't you? The tone was dry and distant, and these words made her feel even more painful. Gathering the last of her strength, she spoke haltingly, desperately, as if trying to grab hold of the last opportunity. Chris, I swear, I have nothing for him. That is, it was. But it's not the same. It's some kind of stupid. Passion, cloudiness. I want to fix everything. I love you, do you hear? She wasn't lying now, at this moment, frightened and desperate. She really felt that she was losing something priceless. But Chris didn't seem to believe a word she said. Do you love me? He asked almost in a whisper. Have you read your own messages? There is a lot about love, but not for me. Ashley sobbed, holding her hands to her face. This was the reality. All her words seemed empty next to the facts that he saw on the screen. She understood that she could no longer cross it out, as if nothing had happened. The offense has been committed, and lying here is pointless. I'll tear everything apart, she squeezed out pleadingly. This is a mistake. I'm ready to do anything to get our relationship back. Silence hung like an invisible wall between them. He nodded slowly, not as a sign of agreement, but rather as a person who takes note of incomprehensible information. Maybe so, he said finally, but I'm not sure that we still have our relationship. The words ended there. Chris turned away and walked out into the hallway, leaving Ashley crying in the living room. She heard him climb the stairs to the second floor and slam the bedroom or office door behind him. It was impossible to tell. For some time, she stood in the middle of the room in complete stupor, feeling that her life was collapsing and she could not turn it back. The sound of his own breathing sounded deafening in the empty silence. My eyes burned from tears, my throat hurt, my heart was pounding somewhere near my throat, making it difficult to breathe. The words, I love you, hung in the air, finding no response. She understood. Now everything depended not on her plea, but on whether he would find even a drop of trust within himself to believe her again, and whether he would even want to. It was a conversation without meaning, a conversation that could no longer become salvation for them. Chris received confirmation of what he had long suspected, and the silence with which he went upstairs cut her more than any scream. They still called themselves a family, at least formally. They continued to live under the same roof, woke up in a shared bedroom, and followed their usual daily routine. But a painful, oppressive atmosphere reigned in the air, as if the air around was saturated with an invisible pain. Immediately after that fateful conversation, When Chris found out about the betrayal, a wall of silence arose between them. Ashley asked for forgiveness, cried, and insisted that she would do everything to return to her previous relationship. Chris listened to her, did not shout, did not take out his anger, but looked with such emptiness in his eyes that it killed her much more than any reproaches. At first, they tried to talk, start a dialogue about plans for the weekend, about children, about renovating the bathroom. But all these conversations quickly fizzled out. A few awkward phrases and again silence, or a forced change of topic. It seemed that everyone was afraid of touching a painful wound, and so days passed, and then weeks and months. One got the impression that they lived like roommates, where there was no open hostility, but no real intimacy. Chris left for work early in the morning, returned for dinner, politely asked about the children's affairs, climbed into his room, or looked at his laptop. Ashley pretended to be focused on schoolwork, checking notebooks, preparing homework, but at home she seemed afraid to speak loudly or laugh. All manifestations of emotions were too harsh on her ears. Of course, they didn't tell their daughter and son anything directly, but the children were not blind. They saw that their parents hardly hugged, did not argue, and did not joke with each other as before. Instead, they seemed to be trying to keep their distance. "Mom, why do you and Dad always walk around so thoughtful?" Jenny asked one evening as Ashley was putting laundry in the closet. "We just have a lot on our plate," Ashley answered with an uncertain smile. "Work, bills, plans for the future. We are adults, Jenny." But the daughter didn't believe it. These words sounded too unconvincing. She saw that something more serious was going on than simple concerns. And the son, Tom, became increasingly detached and silent, plunging into his own school and teenage problems. He saw that his parents had no time for him and withdrew into himself. Ashley was tormented by the realization that their family crisis was affecting the children. But she didn't know how to tell them the truth, and she didn't dare turn everything around at once, suddenly breaking off relations with Chris. Deep down, she hoped that time would heal the wounds, and Chris would at least begin to forgive her. She broke up with her lover, Josh, shortly after the truth emerged. None of his messages and pleas for a meeting could force her to continue this deception after all. She saw that it had come to a real catastrophe, which was destroying the life of not only her, but also her family. The conversation was short and painful. She said that it was all over, that she could not and did not want to continue this affair. Josh tried to object. "I understand everything, but..." Talked about feelings, that everything can be fixed, that their connection is special. But Ashley stood her ground. She made a mistake, she went too far, and now her family comes first for her, no matter what cracks it may have. As she left, she realized that perhaps in his eyes she looked cruel and inconsistent. But she had no choice. In any other situation, she would have doomed herself to even greater deception. And yet, bitterness remained in her soul. Once these meetings gave her the feeling that she was alive again, that her soul had not died. But now she clearly saw at what cost this happiness was given to her. The first months after the exposure, they did not even touch each other. They slept in a common bed, but often back to back. Then one night Chris, seemingly overcoming his inner disgust, hugged her. Ashley felt a strange mixture of hope and horror. She understood that her husband's body missed intimacy, but his soul did not. Sex returned to their lives cautiously, irregularly, and inevitably cold. Chris often did this silently, as if fulfilling a marital duty. There was no tenderness in his movements, and a dull emptiness burned in his eyes. Ashley accepted him, weakly giving in like women who are weighed down by guilt for everything that happened. Sometimes she tried to show affection, hug him tighter, whisper something warm, but he invariably pulled away, as if he was afraid that her words were false. She felt how, after such intimate episodes, an even greater melancholy was creeping up on her. Yes, they are physically together, but there seems to be an abyss between them. And each time the hope that everything would return to normal became weaker. "We're probably just trying to pretend that we live as before," she thought, washing her face in the bathroom at midnight, when Chris was already asleep. "I saw my tear-stained eyes in the mirror, and realized that a feeling of guilt and emptiness was eating me up from the inside. But she continued because she didn't know if she had the right to refuse this last illusory chance. Over and over again, Ashley tried to talk openly, again and again asking Chris to give her a chance to make things right. He listened, sometimes nodded briefly, but rarely answered. Sometimes he would say, "I'm trying," and then the conversation would die down, and she saw the impenetrable wall of mistrust reflected in his eyes. Sometimes Chris made steps forward. For example, he agreed to go to a family picnic that Jenny asked to organize at the lake. But all day he didn't say almost a word to Ashley. He only smiled forcefully at the children, trying not to spoil their mood. They returned home in the same silence, and she cried along the way in the car, realizing that all their attempts were just an appearance. For her, a year passed in painful repentance. Every time she looked at her husband, a wave of shame rose inside her. Chris made no attempts to humiliate her, did not reproach her, did not blackmail her. However, this only made things worse, as if he had completely turned off his emotions, leaving no chance for a sincere conversation. Almost 12 months had already passed, and it seemed that the calm had dragged on. There were no storms outside, no loud scandals, no unexpected statements. They continued to go to work, take care of children, pay bills, even go shopping together, but all this was reminiscent of the life of strangers forced to share living space. "Chris," Ashley said one day at the end of the day, when the children were already asleep, "maybe we should contact a family psychologist. I know this would have sounded funny before, but—" "I don't want to," he snapped, without raising his head from the phone. "Why?" "Because our conversations are no longer useful. A psychologist won't help either if everything inside is dead." He said this in a colorless voice, causing Ashley to shrink as if she had received a blow. She saw that behind these words there was not anger or resentment, but a scorched pain that left behind an emptiness. And I didn't know if it was possible to revive something that had died. Sometimes she asked herself why she continued to endure all this, why she didn't leave. But then she remembered the children, the house they had built together for many years. And Chris did not openly propose to separate apparently. He also did not have the strength to decide on a divorce. They floated with the flow, as if in a quiet harbor without wind, but in reality in stagnation, where there was neither development nor happiness. Sometimes the thought came, maybe he also has someone on his side. But she'd never seen any signs of it, and Chris didn't seem like the kind of person who would respond with deceit to deceit. Rather, he chose the path of indifference, as if he wanted to protect himself and no longer let Ashley into his inner life. The years spent as neighbors exhausted the already exhausted psyches of both. Ashley had a hard time smiling at work and tried to be attentive to the children. Chris seemed to exist in a semi-automatic mode. He worked, sometimes repaired something in the house. He could take the child to training, but he avoided conversations with his wife, as if he was afraid that his words would remind himself of the pain that she had caused. One evening, as he was putting Tom to bed for the night, his son asked, "Dad, is everything really bad with you and Mom? Why have you become such strangers?" Chris's heart sank. He ran his hand through the teenager's hair, sighed heavily, but did not answer anything clearly. He just muttered something encouragingly, like adult problems, adding, "We love you and your sister, don't think too much." Tom had to be content with this. Meanwhile, Ashley was quietly sobbing in another room, buried in a pillow, feeling that this was not life, but an endless punishment in which there was no strength to move either forward or backward. She asked for forgiveness from God, from the children, from Chris himself, but apparently forgiveness is not only words, but also the willingness of another person to accept these words. But Chris seemed unable to, or I just didn't want to. And so they continued to live side by side, but not together. Only rare moments in a host of monotonous days reminded them of the times when they were a full-fledged family. One of the children joked at dinner, and they both smiled automatically, meeting their gazes for a split second. But the smile melted as soon as someone remembered how many gaps there were between them. So this year of room existence dragged on. A year during which both Ashley and Chris finally realized that it was impossible to return to the old world. They tried, took timid steps, but did not find the way back to real intimacy. And now life had turned into a sluggish routine, where sex became just a necessary compromise, words carried the taste of an uncomfortable formality, and the dream that everything would suddenly heal seemed like an empty illusion. However, in the soul of each of them, there remained a certain point where a faint hope lurked. Suddenly, over time, the pain would subside, and they would find a new path, or at least decide what to do next. But for now, days passed, turning into months, and this fragile peace remained their painful reality. Chris got up before dawn. Ashley woke up from a quiet rustling sound in the bedroom, as if someone was carefully tiptoeing, trying not to wake her. At first it seemed to her that it was just a dream, but as soon as she opened her eyes, everything became clear. Chris was standing at the wardrobe, taking clothes from the shelves and carefully putting them in a travel bag. She didn't immediately understand what was happening. My heart sank with alarming foreboding. In the semi-darkness, his figure seemed alien, and although she saw him methodically filling the bag with his things, the realization did not come immediately. It seemed impossible that after all these months of lingering silence and cold attempts to return something, he suddenly decided to leave so easily. "Are you leaving?" she asked in a hoarse whisper, sitting up on the pillow. My throat was dry and my voice sounded foreign. Chris didn't even flinch, as if he knew that this moment would come, and she would definitely speak. He looked back and looked at her face for a second. But there was neither rage nor contempt in the eyes, only firm, almost passionless fatigue. "Yes," he answered briefly. Ashley was silent. She didn't ask why. After all, the answer was obvious long ago. Any attempt to fix their marriage was in vain. He froze in the middle of the room, clutching the handle of his bag, and finally added, "I can't do it anymore. I tried, but there was nothing left." He said these words quietly, without strain, and in Ashley's ears they sounded louder than any scream. Previously, she was afraid that he would make a loud scandal. Maybe he would pour out his pain into screams and accusations. But he chose a different form of farewell, without a scene and reproaches, without a stream of harsh words. And for some reason, this hurt much more than if he had accused her of all her sins. They looked at each other for a couple of minutes. She, sitting on the edge of the bed, he, standing halfway to the door. Finally, Ashley whispered, "I'm sorry." But she herself was not sure what exactly she was asking: to return to her, or to forgive the betrayal, or at least not to carry any more anger in her soul. Chris nodded as if to say, "Noted." "Nothing more. I'm leaving the house to you," he said, still quietly. "Money on the card. I will pay the mortgage until we finally decide what to do." He didn't say, "until we get a divorce," but Ashley knew that meant it. Their formal family connection had long ago become an empty formality, and now it was melting away like morning fog. And the children? She squeezed out, feeling fear flooding her head. Chris shook his head. "I'll talk to them myself. I'll pick it up on weekends, sometimes on vacation. We will discuss the schedule so as not to make things worse for them." She knew that Chris was a good father and would never give up on his children. It's just that now he won't live with them in the same family. Just a few months ago, it seemed like a fantasy to imagine their family becoming divided. But now it was reality itself. Ashley was silent. Tears were quietly flowing down her cheeks. She didn't know what to say, how to hold him back. However, over this year, she tried every conceivable and inconceivable way to get their relationship back. It didn't work out. Now that he had already made his decision, any words seemed useless. "Are you sure there's no chance?" She didn't finish, suffocating from the lump that rolled up. He didn't answer right away, as if he was thinking about what to say. He looked at her closely. "Sorry, that's it. I just can't live anymore pretending to be almost normal." Then, catching his breath, Chris squeezed the handle of his bag and, as if deciding everything at once, took hold of the keys in his jacket pocket. "I'll be in touch as soon as I get settled. I'll call the kids." He turned away and left the room. You could hear him going down the stairs, then something rustling in the corridor, probably checking if he had forgotten anything important. Ashley felt for a moment that she should run after him, rush to him, hug him, and at least say goodbye for real. But the legs did not obey, the body seemed to be petrified from fear and pain. The impact of the front door sounded like a gunshot, and it was all over. She was left in an empty bedroom filled with silence and twilight light. They lived in this house for so many years, they moved here with enthusiasm, with dreams of the future. And now he left without even disturbing the peace of the children, still dozing in their rooms. Of course, the children soon learned that their father had left. Not on a business trip, not on business, but seriously. Jenny was the first to react, in tears demanding to know where Dad was and why he wasn't spending the night. Tom's reaction was more restrained, but Ashley could see that deep down he was shocked and disappointed. She tried as best she could to calm them down, said something about how they need time with Dad to sort it out, but she didn't believe in her words either. Soon Chris himself came to talk to the children. He said that he loved them, that they could call at any time, and he would come and take them to his place for the weekend. He didn't mention a word about betrayal, about Ashley's betrayal. He didn't justify his leaving in any way. The children cried and asked questions, to which he answered evasively, "That's how the circumstances turned out." But at least he didn't abandon them completely and tried to remain a father. Several months have passed. Ashley didn't fully understand where Chris lived now. All I knew was that he found an apartment closer to the office, rented a small apartment there, and arranged everything for himself. Every time he picked up the children, he nodded briefly to her in the hallway, avoiding personal conversations. There were no more quarrels or explanations between them, only meager words. "Hello. Are the children ready?" "Yes, here are their things." "Thank you. Goodbye." Sometimes he would linger in the yard, practice basketball with his son, or help his daughter deliver something, and Ashley would sneak a look from the window as he laughed with the children, seemingly not suffering at all. The expression on his face did not reveal the previous fatigue or indifference. On the contrary, sometimes he looked almost peaceful. In the depths of her soul, she understood that it became easier for him without her, because a year of living together with empty walls put too much pressure on him. A couple of months after Chris left, the children returned home and mentioned Daddy's friend. Ashley tensed, but tried not to show it to them. "To a friend? Have you met her?" Tom nodded, trying to look indifferent, although his eyes said otherwise. Jenny immediately said, "Yes, her name is Melissa. She comes to her dad sometimes. They cooked dinner together. She said she works somewhere in an office nearby. She seems nice." Ashley smiled with effort, trying to be an understanding mother. But inside, everything shrank. She had no right to reproach Chris. They are not together. He has every right to a new life. And yet, hearing that he had another woman was like swallowing bitter poison. This fact was a reminder that their marriage was really over, that no, "maybe we'll get back together" would happen. Ashley's days were filled with endless routine: school, taking care of children, paying bills, cleaning. The house, which seemed like a cozy family nest, now evoked a feeling of emptiness, especially when the children went to their father for the weekend, and she was left alone among the walls, reminiscent of the past. In the evenings, she wandered through the rooms, noticing photographs on the shelves there. She and Chris were smiling while relaxing by the sea. There they were holding babies in their arms in the first years of life. These pictures cut my soul. Previously, she had not attached such importance to them, but now she could not look calmly. It seemed that someone else's family was looking at her from photographs, happy people who no longer had anything to do with her. Sometimes she thought, "Maybe I should leave here?" But where? The house belonged to both of them, although Chris left it to her. It would be strange to sell now, and the children are used to this area and the school. All that remained was to endure this constant reminder of the once complete, but now lost happiness. She tried to organize classes for herself. She started taking painting courses on weekends, for which she really didn't have enough time before. But there was still a feeling of sorrow in my soul. Sometimes she talked to her friends, who nodded with sympathy and said platitudes. Time heals everything. You are strong, you can handle it. But she saw fear in their eyes. Everyone was afraid to be in her place. They were afraid that betrayal, like a hurricane, could sweep away any family. At night, Ashley often woke up and lay in the dark for a long time, remembering the day when she first crossed this fatal line of betrayal. How then everything seemed exciting, alluring like the possibilities of a new life. Now she realized that she had lost much more than she could have imagined, and no words of apology will bring back the trust and warmth that once connected her and Chris. Several times she tried to talk to him openly when he came to pick up the children, but he clearly did not want to discuss personal matters. And when she dialed his number, he answered politely, without irritation, but dryly. Yes, what happened? Something with the children? If she hinted at feelings, he immediately closed himself off. The girl the children mentioned began to appear more often in the stories. Either they went to the movies as a group, or she helped her daughter with a history project, or she brought Tom a birthday present. It was jealous and painful for Ashley to listen to how the children accepted their new friend. But, not having the right to demand anything else, she smiled silently and tried to refrain from criticism. After several months, she suddenly realized that, despite the severity of loneliness, this pain had become a little calmer. No, it did not disappear, but it was no longer scaldingly acute, but rather acquired a monotonous, chronic form. At some point, Ashley caught herself thinking about the past less, and less even if it happens that a wave of regret or shame rolls in, but without the previous emotional storm. Perhaps this is the very time heals that her friends told her about. With Chris, they were never able to build the bridge back, and she herself stopped persistently striving for this. She saw that he had found other happiness, or at least other hopes. The children slowly got used to the new family format. They spent time either with their mother or with their father. Of course, it was not easy for them, but they adapted. Does Ashley still have a chance for a new life? Maybe. But for now, she was clearly aware that she needed to go through a period of loneliness and deep repentance before coming to terms with this ending. She once thought that betrayal would give her a feeling of freedom and new colors, but now she understood how much pain it brought to all of them. And now she was sitting in her living room, where once the whole family had laughed and watched movies. On the table lay a stack of children's notebooks that she had to check. Next to it was a half-forgotten phone with rare messages from colleagues or friends. A cold wind raged outside the windows, and the house seemed too big and empty. She involuntarily wrapped her arms around her shoulders, trying to keep warm. Scraps of thoughts flashed through my head. Maybe I should send my resume to other schools and leave this city. Maybe I should finally sell the house and start all over again. But for now, these ideas remain only distant hypotheses. All she had, for sure, was a huge feeling of regret and longing for something that could not be returned. She stood up, turned off the light in the living room, and walked into the empty bedroom. The bed, one half of which remained unwashed. Once here at night, they slept with Chris, but now he was gone, and he is unlikely to return. Ashley sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the floor for a long time. Then she slowly lay down and wrapped herself in a blanket. Tears slowly flowed from the eyes, quiet, almost silent. She knew that this time no one would hug her, comfort her, or say, "Everything will pass." She was left alone with her choice, with her mistakes, with life, which went somewhere further without her participation. The sun was rising outside the window, spreading the first glare of morning across the sky. For some, this dawn promised a new day, new opportunities. For her, it's just another few hours in an empty house, another morning when she wakes up again and realizes that yesterday's world no longer exists, and that now she will have to rebuild her life, albeit with scars on her soul that will never completely disappear. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.